The drop pod fell like a thrown nail straight, furious, vibrating with every bad decision that had led me here. Heat tiles howled. Bluebird's aft cameras gave me a last, grainy glimpse of the carrier vectoring away on a trail of repentant fire. My escort winked into specks, and then into nothing at all. Easy, Bluebird. I told a shell full of ablative foam and spite. Feet under, chin down, the pod disagreed. It flipped me a red cascade of warnings. Orbital relay, silent. Drone swarm, lost. Bulls, compromised by unknown flora. Pilot, breathing too fast. Pilot is dealing with it, I said, palming the med spray into my rib through the suit's pressure web. Cold blossomed under the bruise. The world narrowed to numbers, rate of descent, pressures. The creep of temperature toward the yellow. The big one was the altimeter stepping down through the atmosphere kilometers. Notched with a drunk carpenter's confidence. We hit the high canopy like a comet that hadn't read the safety briefing. Violet fronds lashed the viewport. Something the size of a glider leapt aside and left behind a smell like pepper and rain. Bluebird's emergency pedals blew. The chute coughed open, tore. And we went from ballistic to hopeful to ballistic again in the space of one curse. The landing legs deployed with a wince, grabbed earth, and skidded through loam until we wedged sideways in a cradle of root. The impact punched the med spray deeper into my rib and made the pod's interior ring. Like a church bashed with a broom handle. We stopped. The silence afterward had weight. I listened. First rule of groundfall, don't trust the first quiet. You wait for systems to die or for the place itself to exhale. The pod ticked as it cooled. Outside, something trilled 5 notes and waited for an answer. I checked my kit. The inventory was my litany against panic. Diplomatic standard coil of copper wire. A roll of optically pure thread. Signal flares that doubled as cooking heat. A pocket autolingua with a library of dead and living grammar trees. A microfab patch the size of my hand with 1 day's worth of feedstock. Pressure knife. Water skinner. 3 sachets of med. I could carry all of it, but not gracefully. The drone swarm would have hauled the rest. The drone swarm was in smoking ribbons across a latitude. Band I'd prefer not to think about. I thumbed the hatch and let the pod take one more hot breath before she coughed me into an alien. Afternoon. Light came down in emerald shafts through layers of frond as wide as sails. The bowls were ladder straight and wore armored bark like mosaic tile. The air tasted like crushed mint leaf and old stone. Moisture beaded the suit and ran in thin lines into the ankle gutters. Some were not far, running water. Some were not far in the other direction. Patient thunder that might have been a waterfall or a big, slow animal thinking about me. I pulled my helmet, clipped it to my belt. Faces matter in first contact and put my hands where strangers could see them. Envoy Elena Park, I said, out loud to the forest and to myself in case either forgot. My voice didn't carry far. The trees drank sound. The first figure stepped out of the roots, like a choice being made. She was tall by human measure, 2 heads above me, with the kind of long, easy strength you earn by pulling a life out of a reluctant place. Copper brown skin flecked with pollen. Hair in ring braids threaded with bits of shell and polished seed that chimed against each other. When she moved, eyes set a fraction wide, as if built to map horizon. Behind her, 3 more, fanning with a hunter's geometry. They carried spears fletched with translucent fiber and tipped with dark, glassy teeth that were certainly not stone, but remembered stone. The way a knife remembers an ancestor. I kept my posture soft, shoulders down, palms visible, spine proud. Fear reads like prey. Too much pride reads like a challenge. I let them see that I was neither. I bowed. Not too deep, not too small. Envoy Elena Park, Commonwealth Contact Corps. I come in peace. The autolingua sat at my throat listening, aching to help and offering nothing yet. It needs hooks, roots, and sound. This place was a song I didn't know. The woman's gaze touched my face, then my hands, then the copper spool at my belt. Her nostrils flared. She said one-word consonants, like stone taps, vowels stretched and sung. The autolingua fluttered and returned nonsense tastes: male, seed, curse, stone. No anchor. I tried the basics. I mimed eating, food. I broke a ration square into precise halves, offered one on my open palm. I held up the copper wire, made a small show of its flexibility. The bright bite where it had scarred my thumb. Trade. Her pupils tightened. A low murmur moved through the three behind her. She put the spear point to my sternum very gently. There was the slightest prompt behind the gesture. Step back. Be still. She said it again. Slower. Man, not. Exactly, I said before my better sense could sit on my mouth. I lifted my chin, inviting scent. No stubble, no typical secondary sex signal set. She leaned close enough for me to see the gold pollen dusting along her cheekbone, and inhale a smell like smoke and river mud and the bitter oil from some crushed seed. Her breath tickled the hairs in my ear. Man, she said with more certainty. The Autoling's little lights jittered and then settled on a cluster, unhappy with itself. Behind her, one of the three clicked teeth against tongue in what my gut told me was a sign word. The net dropped from above before I had finished filing that fact. It wasn't vine. It wasn't anything I could name quickly. Fibers as fine as hair braided into something that took a static charge like a cat on a sweater. It wrapped my shoulders and wrists and bit my palms with a crackle that traveled down my tendon lines and jumped in my teeth. I didn't fight. Not because I couldn't give me 3 seconds and a pressure knife, and I could have made this very expensive for all of us, but because getting clever in the first minute is how envoys become cautionary songs. I let the net own my arms. I let my breath slip into the space between fear and numb. I put my weight where they wanted it, and I watched. The leader, the braid-ringed woman, tilted her head at the way I complied, filed that away too, then flicked a small 2-finger gesture to the left. The three behind her flowed into new places. She didn't look back to see if they obeyed. They did. That's how you tell a woven hierarchy from a brittle one. Kith Kith, she said, name or title. I couldn't tell. She tapped my chest with the spear again in a rhythm that felt ceremonial, not hostile. Then to the others, a string of syllables with a bell buried inside. It had the sense of take him, not kill him. I unclenched muscles I hadn't realized I'd clenched. They started us moving. Two at my elbows, one ghosting my right shoulder like a probability. The leader walked point as if the forest belonged to her and loved her enough to get out of the way. It did. The ground from pod to path looked like something had steam ironed the undergrowth weeks ago. We stepped into a groove that had the softness of a well-used palm. On the way, I learned the forest's vowels. Vines hummed when brushed, a low warning that smoothed after a momentan acoustic plant, tuned to discourage large bodies from becoming too enthusiastic. The boles wore shelves of fungus that looked like lacquered fans. Every 10th tree bore a ring of shallow cuts that bled sap into small clay cups, and near each cup a cluster of insect husks lay like wine-thrown leaves. We were in somebody's garden, in other words, and I was a beetle is what I was. We crossed a line where the temperature stepped down like a shallow stair. The air lost its mint and found stone and steam. The thunder I'd heard earlier grew teeth, separated into layers, reorganized itself from threat to infrastructure. Then the path opened, and the city, if you can call a place woven from living things, and good guess is a city settled into view. It spiraled. That was the first and last truth of it. A limestone sinkhole took up the middle of the world, ringed with ledges like the inside of a conch. Each ledge had been coaxed into plazas with braided balustrades and steps grown from rote, and poured with something like lime. Rope bridges webbed from ledge to ledge, supported by the ribs of something large and long ago river-born. Fire pits in careful circles reflected orange up into the fog, and everywhere bells hung from lintels and roofs and door frames, bells of shell and fired clay, and bone and hammered metal so thin it had to have been beaten for days by a stubborn heart. And people, women old and young, carrying baskets of tubers, carrying infants in slings, carrying knives with the casual grace of those who cut plant and meat often and without applause. Children with hair in small bell-tied plaits. Teenagers in pair work, shoulders pressed, giggling in a language whose stress pattern my ear couldn't catch yet. The whisper that followed us moved like wind around a post. It touched me the way an ocean wave touches a rock to see what it tastes like. They took me to the middle ring, to a flat ovular stone the color of old embers. It radiated heat, not skin blistering, but insistent. A hand on the sternum, reminding the body of the concept of warmth. They painted my face with a fine brush, triangles under the eyes, a single stripe along the bridge of my nose that I couldn't see, but could feel tightening. As it dried, I kept my breathing regular. The Autolingua murmured at my throat like a cat dreaming about translating mice. The leader, call her matriarch, until I learned better, took the high seat on the rim. She wore a mantle made from beetle casings, iridescent and sewn into patterns that moved like oil on water when she turned. When she lifted her chin, the sound dampened as if the air itself bent over. She spoke. The Autolingua leaned forward inside me and tried to read a storm. It threw up partials, cycle, keeping, sky iron, hearth, terms. The cadence had 3 beats, and then hit a 4th you only noticed when it wasn't there. The way you notice grief, she finished. Elders with wrists tattooed in what might have been tally marks approached with 3 bowls. The first held roasted tubers slicked in fat and dusted with something that smelled like walnuts, smoke, and citrus safe. I ate with deliberate delight and nodded thanks. The second was a dark syrup on a spoon carved from a finger bone, or something working very hard to look like one, bitter, medicinal. The kind of thing that makes a body choose to tell the truth. I swallowed and let my eyes water like they wanted. The third was a paste of powder blue petals. I touched it to my tongue and left it there, not swallowing. It went numb in a way that worried me. I smiled around it and made with my mouth closed. The elder inclined her head, satisfied, and moved on. They leaned in and sniffed my breath and my eyes and the sweat at my temples. The paste on my tongue made my palate buzz. I breathed slow and kept it cupped behind my teeth. Matriarch rose. She walked the curve of the rim toward me with the easy menace of a blade you keep around, because it's been in the family for generations. She stopped at arm's length, closer than strangers stand, and spoke again. The Autolingua catching, and then miracle hooking onto something at last. 105, it said in my ear. Years, man, gone, I repeated, careful. 105. Years, man, gone. Her shoulders relaxed 1/8 of an inch. She nodded. Then she added a 4th word, one the Autolingua didn't need to translate, but did anyway. Perhaps to make sure I couldn't pretend misunderstanding. Hungry. The square went very still. The kind of still that expands a heartbeat into a room. Mouths didn't open very wide when the kith smiled. They opened wider when they were being honest about their own monsters. The children watched me like lightning, love, fear. The knowledge that bolts kill trees and also make glass and sand, I thought. Very fast and very small. They don't eat strangers. They ritualize pressure. They keep a ledger with the sky. Matriarch tapped the hot stone beside my hip with her staff. The tone it gave back climbed my bones and settled behind my eyes. Her gaze flicked once to the sinkhole's throat where steam turned, a ghost stirring under a sheet. Why? I asked, gesturing to the spirals, to the absence of anyone shaped like me. Men gone. She didn't look at me. She looked at the city. She drew a spiral on my painted cheek with one finger, leaving a cool trail that dried quick and tight. She spoke a sentence so slow it felt like a prayer you say when you're not sure who's listening. The Autolingua chewed on it like a difficult root, and then exhaled a truth with rounded edges. Men grew too loud. The sky listened. It took them back. I kept my face still and let my stomach fall through a long, long shaft. 105 years is not an accident. It's policy, or it's a machine that mistakes policy for desire. The bells tolled, soft and late. The city answered with a hush that felt practiced. Matriarch watched me like a chessboard. I watched her like a cliff. We were both deciding which part of what we just said had been for show. I swallowed the blue paste. Finally better in me than on me if someone decided to check my tongue and slid my heel an inch. To test the net's give. The paste had softened the fibers, just a kiss. I let that knowledge sit in my muscles. I didn't use it. Not yet. Terms must be met, Matriarch said, without teeth but not without teeth. The Autolingua offered terms, keeping debt. Her eyes carried funerals, yes, but they also held the pragmatism of someone who had turned hunger into ritual. So it wouldn't turn into murder. My job scope was suddenly very narrow and very sharp. The plan: contact, culture map, Utaxi station salvage negotiation. Don't start a religion came apart in my hands like a cheap comb. The new plan was the old plan with an uglier coat. Learn fast enough to live. I raised my hands as far as the net allowed, kept my voice low enough to respect their bells, and did a small, stupid, human thing. I clapped. Once, soft, wrong. Heads turned as if a string had been pulled. The children flinched. Even the air seemed to stiffen, offended on their behalf. The kith's music had been all off beats and missing time, a dance around in absence. My clap landed square on the beat like a boot. It wasn't dominance. It was an invitation. But to them, it was noise where silence was law. Matriarch's hand reared toward the nearest bell rope. I clapped again. 4. Then 3. Then 5. Prime meter. Nothing in their ritual had leaned on primes. Everything had been built to avoid aligning with a big rhythm. I clicked my tongue on the off beats and put their word man and the rests between my hands. The autolingua pricked up, alert, recognizing a pattern it could grab. The kith recognized something, too. Not the math, the attention. Rhythm is a handle in every world. Listen, I said, in my language and in theirs, trusting the autolingua to meet me in the middle. It managed the word, shy but sure. Here, they didn't move. They didn't breathe. Even the steam waited. Envoy Elena Park, I said. To matriarch and to the hot stone and to the sinkhole and to the idea of a machine that might be sleeping under our lives. I come in peace. I come to keep. Matriarch's pupils drifted open, just a fraction. Her hand on the bell rope eased. Somewhere far below, under stone and ritual and 105 years of women figuring it out alone. Something old and hot and human-made shifted in its sleep. It heard a beat. And that was how I arrived, as a mistake, as a meal, as a metronome. They called themselves the kith. And their city, if you can call a place of rope bridges and living walls, a city spiraled around a limestone sink so deep the air dropped a degree each wrap. Every ledge was a plaza, and every plaza a bowl of carved runes, fire pits, and drying racks. Everywhere, the ringing of bells, slow, layered peals that seemed to mark not just hours, but phases of reflection. They brought me to the middle ring, strapped me to a stone that pulsed with heat, and painted my face in triangles. Children peered at me the way our kind watches lightning, with love half swallowed by fear. No men, no males, anywhere. Only women, young and old, bodies long and dense with work. The only male presence was bone, antlers worked into arches, jawbones made into knives. I watched, counted, mirrored. Anything to find the grammar of their lives. The braid-ringed woman, the one who'd first spoken to me, took the high seat at the rim. She wore a mantle of beetle iridescence, and when she lifted her chin, everyone went quiet. She spoke for a long time. My translator started to predict the cadence, if not the words: cycle, harvest, sky iron, keeping, and man, always back to that dot. When she finished, 3 elders approached with bowls. They offered me one relish of roasted tubers that tasted like walnuts and smoke. I nodded thanks and ate. The second bowl was bitter syrup on a fingerbone spoon. I swallowed. The third was a paste of blue petals. I kept it on my tongue and pretended. The elders leaned forward and sniffed my eyes like dogs. The crowd tensed. The braid-ringed woman slammed her staff. The bells answered with a single deep tone that made my rib throb. She came close, hair tinkling, and spoke in slow, careful syllables, as if reading off a broken stone. The translator managed 3 words this time, like a magician pulling coins from ears. 105 years. Man, gone. I repeated them back. 105 years. Man, gone. She nodded. Then, with a grim, almost ceremonial resignation, she added a 4th, hungry. That was the first time I saw their teeth without the polite lip press. Not like ours. Not carnivore exactly, but not. Grinding plates with serrations, evolution's compromise. The tales would have called them cannibals, but it wasn't that simple. It was ritual and scarcity braided to a rope. My gut cooled. It would be a bad joke to say they looked at me like dinner. It would be truer to say they looked at me like a debt. No wonder every bell here rang slightly late. Why? I asked, gesturing to the city, to the rings of women. Men gone. She stared through me, and then at the sinkhole's throat where steam turned like ghosts. With a fingertip, she drew a spiral on my painted cheek. The translator pushed hard, chewing on phonemes and spitting sparks. A sentence emerged wobbly but alive. Men grew too loud. The sky listened. It took them back. The kith had tried to silence the sky since. They softened footsteps, wove sound-canceling cloaks from the leaves of a plant that buzzed when touched. and tuned their bells to a frequency that sat between heartbeats. The men males had been the drummers, the callers, the thunderers. When they stopped, something else in the system shifted. Fertility, social glue, predator pacing, they didn't know. They only knew the hole left by the missing, and sometimes, when the hole bit back, when bell cycles slipped, when stillbirths came in clusters, when storms unpicked the bridges, there were rituals. Membranes of loss stretched thin. Old stories cracked their knuckles. Hungry, she said again, almost apologetic, and tapped the stone where heat pooled beneath me. Terms must be met. I thought of all the ways first contacts go wrong. A sneeze, a hymn, a laugh at the wrong inch. I also thought of my job description: bring language, optics, locomotion, a handful of microfab wonders, and a stubborn insistence that there was always a third door. Sometimes HFY isn't roar and plasma. Sometimes it's math and a lie told kindly. Sometimes it's a rhythm. At evening's bell, the one tune so low it made my bones hum. The ceremonial guard loosened the net to move me. I took the moment. I coughed hard. The bitter syrup tried to bounce back up, and with it, the blue petal paste I'd only pretended to keep. I spat both into my palm, rubbed them on the net's knot, and watched the fibers slacken. The stuff was a plant-based plasticizer. Good. Chem is a language too. I slipped one wrist. I didn't run. I stood, raised my open hands, and started to clap. It was soft. It was wrong. It was not their meter. Their heads snapped toward me. Even the children flinched at the sound, as if I'd dropped a pebble into a still ritual pool. The braid-ringed woman, call her matriarch, stood with one hand halfway to the bell rope. I clapped again, slow, for beats, then 3, then 5. A simple prime meter. My tongue clicked the off beats. I spoke their word for man in the hole I left between patterns, inviting it to sit. They didn't understand the numbers. They understood the invitation. Rhythm is a grab rail in every universe. I pulled a coil of copper wire from my belt and held one end. With the other, I touched a stone brazier and then an iron-shod spear point. There was a tickle, then a snap, tiny, controlled lightning. The crowd hissed. I made it gentle, turned the wire into a ring, tapped it in time with the clap-clack of my tongue. Listen, I said. And the translator managed. Here. Then I did something stupid. I sang. Not the star anthem or the contact hymn. I sang a wrong, old as the dirt under soul, in a key my dead grandmother used when she shelled peas and told me that songs were boats you could cross bad water in. The melody is simple, a walk up a hill and a promise to come back down. But in the middle, there's a turn, a note that sits on the edge of sweet and ache. I built the primes around it and made a drum out of my chest with my palm, made thunder with breath. The kith listened like thirsty stone listens to rain. Matriarch's pupils opened. The city held its air. And on the 7th pass, when the offbeats lined up with the bell's late heart, something in the sinkhole answered. A rise of heat, a hiss, a murmur I recognized from 100 dawn watches on 100 bad planets. Pressure. The kith bolted back. I stepped forward. Your men were the drummers? I asked. They kept this place in tune with the thing below. The word the translator found for the thing below was old machine, hot mouth, under sky. For once, the ambiguity helped. Utaxi Station had been built over a geothermal reactor that regulated local climate and kept tectonics in the safe zone. The maintenance protocols were cycles set by human hands. When those hands were gone, when the men who drummed the days were taken or silenced, the machine kept listening and heard only storm. It drifted. The city followed it down the spiral like a lover with a bad heart. Let me talk to it, I said to matriarch, and mimed winding a clock. She stared at me, at my wire, at the net I had slipped and hadn't dropped. Then she did what leaders do when the worst stories line up with the hopeful ones. She gambled. Terms? She asked. Terms, I said. No eating the envoy. Her lip curved. Terms. We went to the edge. A bridge hung over the sink, planked with the ribs of some giant fish whose river had dried up a century ago. Steam licked our faces. I rewound the copper wire into a coil and held it like an offering. Matriarch laid her spear across it. The ring completed, humming a song to loafer ears. The bellmaster tugged the rope in a new sequence. 4, 3, 5. The city looked away, giving us privacy. I counted in primes. And I talked to the old machine in purest human. Knock dot on the 15th repetition. The steam shifted. The hum climbed. A hatch the size of a house, fused with centuries of mineral kiss, shivered and cracked an eyelid. From the gap breathed air older than anybody's mother. Inside, a wall of dead panels waited like stars that forgot how to shine. My hands shook. I plugged my coil into a port that remembered our species and spat a little gratitude current back. An interface ghosted to life. Bare bones. Language fallback. Pictograph. Status misaligned rhythm. Coolant cycle erratic. Tectonic feedback accumulating. Easy, I whispered to a machine that wouldn't understand softness, and started to retune a heart I had only just met. I needed hands. Matriarch gave me 30. The Kith were born engineers. You can't build a city out of the bodies of plants and the bones of rivers without listening hard. They watched my fingers, understood the story of a valve, a gate, a this before that. We braided old copper with new vine and brought the bells into the machine's ear. When it woke fully, it breathed like a sleeper rolling over. The bridges stopped creaking. The heat smoothed. A gale up top eased from strop to sigh. The city exhaled. And for the first time since I arrived, the bells were on time. Matriarch looked at me for a long count, eye to eye, woman to stranger. Then she said, perfectly, a word that needed no translator, stay. We wrote the treaty on bark that tasted of pepper and mineral. The Commonwealth draft called it a memorandum of interim cooperation. The Kith called it a promise we can drink. Both meant the same. You don't eat the envoy. And the envoy doesn't take your stones without asking. 105 years, I said that night, when the fire-thin whisper of the reactor felt like a cat curled in the city's lap. What happened? We sat on the bridge, feet dangling over heat. Matriarch's bells were silent for once. We had men, she said. We had sons. A season came when the storms stopped at the rim and stared. The men climbed and drummed, and their feet were thunder. It pleased the sky, but thunder became hunger. The sky wanted it. It took them. Some we hid. Boys in jars of leaf stillness. Men in the quiet caves. But even quiet was too loud. She looked at me like a knife looks at its sheath. Your kind breaks the sky and then mends it. Break men break. We are the menders after you leave. I winced. Fair. I told her the truth I could. That Utaxi Station had been the first station in a chain that failed. And when the chain snapped, the Commonwealth turned its face to shinier things. Here, the missing men became the stand-ins for missing attention. A city can forgive failure easier than abandonment. We made new terms. We taught each other the words for things that both our languages had too many stories for. The Kith taught me the 3 different kinds of silence: ritual, listening, and blame. I taught them redundancy, which is another word for being allowed to sleep. We set the bells on rails, literally and metaphorically. The bells would mark more than sacrifice. They would call maintenance, and seed exchange, and silly festivals. We built wind harps that sang to the old machine when storms came, so the machine would hear celebration instead of fear. I sent a beacon up to the relay at dawn 2 days later, an antenna taller than pride. It caught a whisper from orbit on the second sunrise. The Commonwealth had not forgotten me, just gotten distracted by 10,000 urgent fires. They asked for a sitrop. I said, contact stable. Indigenous polity, matriarchal, high-skill low-metal, critical infrastructure misaligned, realigned, negotiations ongoing. Send copper. I thought about adding don't send men, but that would be a lie. On the 4th day, a boy sat at the edge of the square, feet swinging, staring at me as if I were hard math. He couldn't keep still. His body pounded a rhythm against the stone, soft, 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 trying not to be sky loud. Matriarch watched him too. The boy's hair was braided short, a child's penance. His mother stood 2 steps behind him with a hand on his shoulder like a tether. You kept some. I said, some, she admitted. We took the sound out of their days. We fed them hush. It saved them. It bent them. I went to the boy and sat, made my hands quiet, let him set the meter. When his heels tapped a 2-3 pattern, I slid a copper ring across the stone and let it sing so low only teeth could hear. He smiled. Not a big smile. The kind a boy makes when a frog jumps into a jar without himself having to chase it. Teach him. If he wishes, Matriarch said, formal as a contract and soft as a bedtime. I nodded and did not call it anything as grand as reintroduction. I called it drums class. We put the work in his ears and the power at his feet, and we taught the difference between thunder and hunger. On the 7th day, the ritual stone where they had nearly cooked me became a table, and we cut fruit on it with knives made from the old fear. The city rang the on-time bell, and then one that was late on purpose, because a little wrongness can be its own kind of joy. A month later, a Commonwealth shuttle cracked the sky just enough to make the children shout, and the elders crossed themselves. 3 envoys stepped out with crates and carriers and the measured, diplomatic faces we practice in mirrors. One was a woman old as a good tool. One was a teenager whose braids were messy. One was a man with the careful hands of someone who knows his presence is a variable in an old equation. The city drew in its breath. The boy at my side clutched my sleeve. Matriarch stood, straight as the first spear and slow as a good decision. She lifted her staff and did not lower it. The bells waited for her word. I took the man's hand, not pulling him forward, not pushing him back, and put it on the copper rail that hummed to the old machine. I kept my other hand on the boy's shoulder, beating a prime under my skin. Terms. I whispered to both of them. Terms. Matriarch's staff came down. The bells answered. The city's hum and the machine's breath braided, and the sky, for once, minded its own business. We ate together. We passed plates over old lines. Nobody got devoured. We argued about voltage and voting and how many drums a street could stand before it became a parade. At sunset, the boy tapped out a rhythm on the table. 4, 3, 5, and the man smiled that same not big smile, the one that lives in the inch between fear and wonder, long after the stars came on. Matriarch sat beside me and bumped my shoulder with hers the way family does when words are tired. Tell me again, she said, the song from the hill. So I did, and the city learned it, and the old machine purred in its sleep, and 105 years of hunger learned slowly, stubbornly to be something else. HFY isn't always about punching the dark until it spits stars. Sometimes it's about clapping wrong until a world relearns how to keep time.